You're watching Capital Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
Welcome back. We're now going to take a look at the Illinois 13th congressional race. And to help do that, we have one of the Republican candidates running for that seat. Republican Jesse Reising, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Cole. Really appreciate it.
You are running as a Republican in the Illinois 13th congressional district, and that district for years was held by Republican Rodney Davis. It was often described when Davis would win an election as a Republican winning a district drawn for Democrats. Now that district is newly drawn with even tighter boundaries and seemingly drawn more for Democrats. How do you as a Republican hope to win in this district that is heavily favoring Democrats?
Yeah, no, as you mentioned, the Mike Madigan, J.B. Pritzker machine gerrymandered our district to favor their handpicked candidate to parachute in from D.C. to effectively rule over us rather than serve and represent us. But my family has been in Decatur, in the heart of our district, for almost 200 years. And this district made me into the man I am. I'm a public school kid from Decatur. And I believe that the Democrats think that they've drawn it strongly enough to favor their candidate, but it's not quite strong enough, because if you look at the 2020 election results, Biden won among the voters in the district as it's currently drawn by about 11 points. And that's the same margin that Glenn Youngkin overcame to become governor of Virginia last year. And things have only gotten worse for Democrats since then, with these skyrocketing gas prices and inflation, crime rates, and the crisis at our southern border. So we feel really good about our chances going into November.
Well, in order to go against a Democrat in November, you first have to beat some Republicans here in June. How has this race been evolving for you, especially as you've picked up some key endorsements, as one of them being the Sangamon County GOP?
Yeah, we feel really good about it. As you mentioned, have picked up some key endorsements, Sangamon County Republican Party, probably dozens of local endorsements by now. Also, Senator Tom Cotton has endorsed me. Had the privilege of having Dr. Ben Carson join me on the campaign trail last week as well. And, just knocking doors and making phone calls, the message is really resonating, because the voters want someone who doesn't just talk about problems, but actually gets results. And that's something that I think that I've proven that I can do throughout my life.
Earlier this week, you unveiled the first part of what you're calling your Day One agenda. That first part focuses on big tech companies, and especially censorship from big tech companies. We can get into the details on that, but my first question is that really the top priority for voters this year? Do you feel like that's very important to the normal voter that's going to work in the morning and coming back and maybe not spending a lot of their time on social media platforms?
Well, the number one priorities are certainly this 8.6% inflation that we're now seeing, and the record high gas prices that are making it difficult for Americans to afford being able to put food on the table or fill up their cars with a tank of gas, and also the surging crime rates and the crisis at our southern border. But I also do want to lay out for the voters specific proposals to show them exactly the kinds of things that I'll be working on a more granular level. And Section 230 is a critical piece of that too, because the big tech companies exert unprecedented control over the public discourse in this country now today. And they're not acting as mere distributors of information any longer. They're actually acting as the speaker. So what my proposal does is better aligns the legal treatment of those entities to their role as a speaker rather than a mere distributor of information under certain circumstances.
Are there any topics in particular that this focuses on for you? I mean, is the censorship on social media, is this strictly about COVID vaccine information, or is this about election results from 2020? What is it that you feel like big tech companies are keeping the people from properly understanding?
Yeah, I think as a general principle, sunlight is the best disinfectant. So whenever Americans are being censored, that just heightens their suspicions. So we need more speech, not less speech. And as one specific example, we had Customs and Border Patrol Commissioner, Mark Morgan, who tweeted about the success of the border wall and had his account suspended. So we need to rein in this unfettered discretion that the big tech companies have to censor information that they find, quote, objectionable, and still receiving these special protections that they do as distributors of information. Rein in those special protections so that they're treated more like speakers.
You've said what you believe are the biggest topics for voters going into the polls, but let's turn to the biggest topics right now in Washington, D.C., the most recent of which was the first of the January 6th committee hearings this past week. I wonder what your thoughts are on that investigation. Do you feel like this is something that, the Capitol needs to be focused on, this attack on the U.S. Capitol? Or do you agree with some of your Republican colleagues that this is more grandstanding?
So I'm a former federal prosecutor who's run criminal investigations, and I don't think a politically motivated investigation is the best way to find truth. So what I would like to see is something that has more bipartisan buy-in. And if we want to talk about primetime hearings that are produced by television producers, I think we should be talking about primetime hearings on the kitchen table issues that everyday Americans are facing, like 8.6% inflation and record high gas prices.
Do you feel like there needs to be more investigation into the attacks on the Capitol on January 6th? There's obviously questions of whether the president played a role in how these attacks formed. Do you feel like those questions need to be investigated more?
I think, again, President Biden's in denial about inflation in this country right now. He initially called inflation transitory, and then once he realized it wasn't transitory, he began claiming, and the media began claiming, that it was somehow good for low-income and middle-income Americans. And then they said, well, it's not good, but it's American businesses' fault. And now he's blaming Vladimir Putin. So I think what we need to focus on is ending this denial about the problem of inflation that we have in this country, so that we can actually focus on solutions like reining in the excessive federal spending that's fueling the inflation.
Yeah, but I asked you about former President Trump, not current President Joe Biden. What I'm asking is, if you were elected to Congress, would you support more investigations into what happened on January 6th?
Well, we're talking about something that happened at the beginning of last year. I would be in office at the beginning of next year. We're talking now that would be 2 years out. So I think the people are ready to move on. There are things that Republicans have proposed, like why wasn't the security situation at the Capitol better? But what I'm focused on are the kitchen table issues that are plaguing everyday Americans. And again, that's inflation, gas prices, crime, and the crisis at the southern border.
The other key issue in Washington, D.C. right now is gun control following the mass shooting in Uvalde a couple of weeks ago. What are your thoughts on current federal gun laws, and do you feel like they need to be strengthened, whether it be by red flag laws or universal background checks?
Yeah, of course, the recent shootings are tragic, and our hearts and condolences are with the victims and the families. But we have a severe mental health crisis in this country right now, and you can really trace that back to the corresponding increase in mass shootings that we've had since the 90s and Columbine. We've had increasing so-called deaths of despair with rising suicide rates, deaths from drug overdoses just had a record last year, substance abuse disorder like alcoholism. So our nation is really unwell. And we need to think holistically about the solutions and doing things like strengthening our communities so people turn to their communities rather than the dark corners of the internet when they feel isolated, as they have during the pandemic, which has only exacerbated these problems. So we need to focus on rebuilding our families and our communities and engaging in civic institutions and faith-based institutions, because participation in all those types of groups is down. So it's no surprise that corresponding with the decrease in participation in those types of organizations and community-based organizations, that our nation has become increasingly unwell.
Do you support red flag laws or universal background checks or any of the other proposals that we've seen get brought forward over the past few weeks?
Well, so, with the Buffalo shooting, for example, New York has red flag laws, and they didn't stop that horrific incident from occurring. So I would like to get to the root causes of these problems before we even have to worry about things like gun laws, because we can stop these things before they happen if our nation is not so unwell as it is right now.
All right, before we go, last question. Just over 2 weeks until voters head to the polls for the primary election. What is the strategy for the Reising campaign leading up to June 28th?
Yeah, we're just going to continue getting our message out. I'm a sixth-generation son of our district who believes strongly in serving the people of our community and our country, and I think my record bears that out. My dream was to serve in the Marine Corps. I went through Marine Corps Officer Candidate School. Serious neck injury ended that dream, but I've been fighting back and finding ways to get results ever since, whether in Afghanistan as a civilian, whether by co-founding the Warrior Scholar Project, which is now a leading national nonprofit organization to serve our veterans, or by taking the oath to support and defend the Constitution as a federal criminal prosecutor. So I'm someone who's proven that I can get results, and that's the same message that we're going to carry through Election Day.
All right, Republican candidate for the Illinois 13th, Jesse Reising, thank you for joining us. When we come back, we'll be speaking with one of Reising's competitors in the 13th district. Regan Deering will be joining us. We'll be right back.